In this video, we're going to be going over 10 techniques that you can use to make your beats more interesting. What's up, my producer friends? It's David with another monsterproductions.com. So in this tutorial, we're going to be walking through this project here. This is actually a beat that I'm working on for the King of Beats contest, which Cymatics is doing right now. If you're not familiar with this contest, I'll be sure to leave a link in the description of the video so you guys can check out all the information about it and enter it if you want to. I think the deadline is February 9th, so you should still have a good bit of time to do it if you want. Right now, I'm still kind of tweaking and finishing up this beat and making sure the mix is good. But by the time I upload this video, I should have entered my submission in the contest. So I'll be sure to leave a link in the description of the video if you guys want to hear the final product and show me some love on there as well. I will be leaving timestamps in the description of this video if you guys want to skip around. I also want to mention that depending on what genre you're producing, not necessarily every single one of these tips is going to be perfect for your specific genre, but for the most part, all of these tips are going to be really good advice for most genres you guys might be producing. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this real quick, and then we'll get into the tutorial. So as you can probably hear, this beat is quite a bit different than a normal beat that I would produce for like an artist. You know, I'm making this specifically for a remix competition, so I went a little over the top with some of the stuff, but I think it's going to be good because it's going to highlight some of these techniques that I want to show you. So the first technique that I want to talk about is adding Foley, effects, percussion, any sort of textural stuff that is not necessarily like the main focus of the beat, but it's going to add a lot of texture and make it more interesting for the listener, whether they realize it or not. Now in this particular beat, I have like tons and tons of Foley, percussion, effects, textural type stuff. And it's even more than just a background thing. As you can see, I mean, I have all of this stuff, have all this effects down here. So let's take a listen to this stuff. Cool, so you get the idea. Originally, I added all these effects and Foley for this intro section, this like sort of glitchy part. But then I copied it over into the rest of the beat, and I actually really liked it. So hopefully you can hear all the different textural stuff that I have going on here with my Foley and effects and stuff like that. And it gives you some ideas and some ways you can use this. You don't have to use it in the exact way that I did. I'd recommend getting creative, trying to figure out cool ways to implement it. Obviously, a really common one would be to have some sort of sweep down effect on the first beat of the measure every 4 to 8 bars or something like that. But sometimes something as simple as just adding a cool little weird effect, maybe throwing a little bit of delay on it and having it pan back and forth like a ping pong delay. Something like that can be a really cool textural thing that just instantly makes your beats more interesting. So the second technique that I want to talk about is adding contrast between sections of your beat. And this is something that I think naturally occurs a lot of times in the arrangement process. but I wanted to briefly highlight it because I think if you think about it, you can get some pretty cool stuff. So the example that I want to show you is coming out of this retro part back into the beat. I have this really sort of smoother retro vibe going on. It sort of gives the illusion of building up, but really I'm like filtering out instruments and it's actually like losing energy, but then I'm adding this sort of shaker effect to bring back the energy a little bit. And then boom, the bass drops, it goes back into the beat, and that adds a lot of really good contrast. So some of the techniques that I use to get this contrast we're actually going to talk about in a little bit. All right, so the next three techniques we're going to be talking about have to do with the hi-hats. And the first one is adding bounce by actually bringing the hi-hat behind the beat. So let me solo this stuff so you can really hear what I'm talking about. So hopefully you can hear what I'm talking about there. The next tip is to add hi-hat rolls. It's something that I'm sure most of you guys are already doing already, but if done correctly, it can really add a lot to your beats. You can get pretty creative with hi-hat rolls. I didn't really do too terribly much with it, just little thing here. If you don't know, it's really easy to do this. You basically go into the piano roll and you just plot the notes going down like that. So the next tip is another hi-hat one. One thing that I like to do to make them more realistic and more interesting and just give them even more bounce is to actually manually go in here and mess with the velocity. So you can see all of these velocities are slightly different and it's going to sound like this. And then another thing that you can do is go into the panning and you see I actually have a layered hi-hat. So the other hi-hat that I have going on, I have it doing a little bit of panning. So all these little things that you can do, they just add up. By the way, guys, if you have your own techniques or tips that I left out in this video, go ahead and leave that in the comments down below. I'm curious to hear what techniques you guys like to use as well. Okay, so tip number 6 is to add or delete layers. So this has to do more with the arrangement. This is a really important one if you're making any sort of hip hop type beats, because these beats are already going to be pretty simplistic. So just adding a layer or taking away a layer can do a lot. So an example of that in this particular beat is down here. I have this first section here where the retro synth is by itself. It's actually two different synths layered, and then I add another synth layered on top of it an octave up. So that's one way in this project that I implemented that. All right, so the next tip is to make the last phrase of every 4 bars or every 8 bars different. And this is something that you can do with drums, percussion, melody, pretty much any element in your production. I think I did it with pretty much everything. In this first section here, you can see the hi-hats cut out. I have some extra Foley and stuff going on here, and it kind of cuts out. So there's just this little break for a second. And then in this section here, going into it, you can see I have this chop where I chopped up the original loop. And then this section here, these last couple measures there, I switch it up. I bring back the original loop, which sounds like this. All right, so tip number 8 is going to be automation. This is a big one. I'm sure most of you guys are doing automation, but it's probably the biggest tip that I can give because you can do so much with automation and give things movement, and it's extremely important to do to keep your beats interesting. So I have several examples of this throughout this track. The one that I want to show you is in this retro section here. I actually have this sound. And you can probably hear how as that continues to go down, I actually have an automation clip which is filtering out those higher frequencies. I have basically a low pass filter on it. So the great thing about automation is you can automate literally anything. It's going to be your best friend for a lot of interesting ideas that you may have that you want to try and implement. Okay, so tip number 9 is going to be to add 808 slides. I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this, but it can be fun to think outside the box and maybe try different kind of slides that you wouldn't normally do. So for example, in this beat, I did a slide on the first note where it hits and then it slides down. So that's pretty cool. So definitely another little thing that just makes this beat a little bit more interesting. All right, so my last tip is to add some sort of vocal hit. Doesn't have to be a vocal hit. It could be any kind of hit, really, like a synth hit or something like that. In this case, I use this vocal. and it's just sort of in the background. I think I added some reverb, maybe some delay. So those are some things you can add on to it, and then just turn it way down, and then it complements these other effects that I have and just adds a little bit of extra to it. So as a little bonus, I'm going to show you a couple other techniques that I did in this beat, which I think might be helpful for you guys. So for example, there's this section where I layer a piece of Foley. It's actually a water droplet along with the snare, and add reverb on the water droplet. I'll solo this stuff. And it gives the illusion of like basically the snare having reverb on it. Sounds really cool. So that's a good technique that you guys can use to keep the snare intact and make it still sound consistent and the same, but then also add reverb on it essentially. So find a sound that complements the original snare and then turn the volume way down but add reverb on it. Another cool thing that I did in this beat with the chops was I actually had the original pattern playing throughout this whole entire section here, and then it was kind of getting a little monotonous. So as I was messing with it, I thought that having it out with the initial hit of the bass and then doing like a reverse effect on it would be kind of cool. So what I did was I made this particular clip unique, brought it into my channel settings, click the reverse button here, and you can hear now this is essentially a reverse sample. So that was just the basic that, and then now it's reversed. And then also I did an automation clip which brings the volume up to kind of add a cool effect. And then this one is the same thing. I just pitched it up to just give it a little bit more variety. And then another cool thing that I did while we're talking about these chops is this section here. I went ahead and brought this up an octave. So it's actually an octave higher than the chops, but it kind of added a little bit more contrast and gave it a little bit more variety. As you can probably hear, another technique that I did with this was I sidechained this chop to the kick. This is a personal preference thing, but for this track in particular, I really wanted that kick to just punch through super hard, and sidechaining is one way to kind of help with that. I want to touch briefly on this first section here, this sort of glitchy part, because when I first started creating something like this was pretty unimaginable to me. I didn't really know how you would go about doing something like this. So let's take a listen real quick. So obviously how I'm achieving a lot of this is with this Foley textural stuff that we talked about. And literally what I do is I lay down the main beat and then I just work section by section. So I have everything rendered to audio, and that way I can easily go in here on the playlist and like, manipulate it to get it exactly where I want it. So if I zoom in here, you can actually see that some of these clips I have cut before the beat, and it's just to add a little bit of extra space to give it more of that glitchy effect. I have this little vocal sample that comes in right off the bat, and I wanted a little bit of space before you hear that. So I wanted the vocal sample to just be by itself. It's a really cool technique that you can do. And then of course, when the snare hits, I added these hi-hat rolls to give it more interest right after this vocal hit. And then there's various sections where it kind of has more space or less space. And, this is up to you whether or not you want to add more. I kind of was playing with the idea of adding more stuff, potentially trying to add some like arps or various other instruments to kind of spice it up even more. But one of the biggest things that you kind of have to learn as a music producer and figure out is when enough is enough. You don't want to do too much, but you want to do enough to keep it interesting. And that's really what this video is all about, is how to do enough with your productions to keep it interesting, keep the listener engaged throughout the whole experience. But at the same time, you don't want it so crazy that the listener can't even really latch on to what the concept or the idea of the production was in the first place. So I guess that's kind of one of the struggles that you have to learn as a producer, to find a balance. I know when I first started off with production, I always wanted to add so much more than necessary to my beats. And it's just something that you kind of learn with time. So I'm going to go ahead and end my rant. Thanks for watching the video, guys. If you liked it, be sure to hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Don't forget to hit the bell notification. That's going to let you know anytime I release videos in the future. Right now I'm doing tutorials about once a week, and those usually come out on Friday or Saturday, so keep an eye out for that. If you have any questions about anything or tutorial requests, feel free to hit me up on Instagram at anothermonster1. Also, if you feel like you're really struggling with music production, sound design, anything in between, and you feel like you just need a little bit of extra help, I am doing one-on-one private lessons, which you can sign up for on my website at anothermonsterproductions.com. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description of this video if you guys want to sign up for that. And while you're there, be sure to take advantage of the free stuff I'm giving away in the description of this video as well. I've got a sample pack and an ebook, which you can download for free. You just need to enter your email address and I'll send that stuff over to you. And as always, I will see you in the next video.